was a load more button at the end of the page instead of next page or previous page. So I also have that version of the settings editor in a build. And yeah, that's all I have, and I would like to get some feedback on these different kinds of techniques or ways to render settings. And if you have a preferred way, then why do you prefer it? Or like, if you think there are disadvantages to any of those builds, then yeah, that's it.
All right, thanks, Avi. Also, really quickly, I just also started recording, so we'll upload this to our YouTube channel later. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. First, thank you for working on editor. I know that I talked about settings editor at the May meeting, community meeting, and I'm glad that this work is finally began. Because I know many VS Code blind VS Code users in Russia who prefer UI settings editor over JSON, and this is first. Okay, regarding the performance, bad performance. Personally, I didn't have any performance issues with a long setting list, maybe because I have a good PC or something. But I think that your build with next page or previous page controls is more preferable. Because when if I understood correctly, in a second build with the load next button, you can end up with a long list of settings. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and I think that page is more accurate and easy to use.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I forgot to mention, but we also have we also have a setting to jump back to the settings tree. So you can use you can configure it to be a key binding, and then
yeah, I read
okay.
it on the issue on the GitHub issue. However, I haven't come up with the sensible. I don't know how to say this word. Sensical key binding. Someone proposed that it should be F6 key, but I think that F6 key and VS Code it has some it jumps on a much larger UI scale than it. Okay, sorry for my bad English, but if we bind F6 on to go to the TUC and then to go to, for example, on Explorer side view or something, I think it not very sorry, I forgot this English word.
It's okay.
It's not very understandable for users. Yeah. And we should think about some another key. Maybe I know that we can in VS Code key bindings, we could just say, okay, this key binding is only for settings window or for terminal window. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
we
correct.
can do that.
Okay, maybe we should assign maybe F. Hmm. Okay, I'm seriously don't know. Maybe someone has some key proposal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just wanted to focus more on the settings list, the navigation first, and then maybe we can come back to the proposing a default key binding for this.
Oh,
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
So I don't know if you saw my Gitter message last night when I played with this. I just checked. It was some build that was built on July 15th. I really liked what you did with the settings. I did it by using my arrow keys to go through the tree view and tab back and forth through the different settings. And as I said in the Gitter comments, it was kind of annoying that when I tabbed past a setting, it would throw me into the rest of VS Code and not loop right back around to the table of contents. I don't know whether that's a choice you made or just general VS Code UI framework stuff, though. The reason I like doing it with the tree view is because I'm a Java programmer. I've been using VS Code exclusively for Java for like the past month and a half, but before that, it was Eclipse for 10 plus years. And the ability to up and down arrow through the tree view of settings and tab once you get to the level you want is a lot like Eclipse. I don't want to be navigating by headings when I'm in VS Code. I don't want to be, using my arrow keys to read lists. I view VS Code as a desktop application, and I really want it to behave like a desktop application, even though it's Electron under the covers. And I don't want to have the mixed modes of half the time I'm treating it like an application and half the time I'm treating it like a web browser.
So you are proposing to not so you find the earlier build better, so you can just press tab to navigate through all of the settings at once instead of navigating back to the TOC?
Yeah, that's how I would do it. And like I said, a lot of that's just because it is awfully similar to Eclipse that way. And it's also the kind of thing where, as long as it's accessible, I don't particularly care that much which way you go with, because settings is the type of thing where it needs to be accessible, but I only have to go in there once in a while, and then, so it's important that it works, but it's not the type of thing that's going to make or break the usage of VS Code for me, if that makes sense. But yeah, I definitely prefer the just tab around, don't treat things as an HTML page, because, when I go to the problems view, I arrow down and up like it's a list. When I'm in the editor window and I go to the menus, it acts like a desktop application. So I really would prefer the original build where it's, behaving like a desktop app.
So when you say tab around, you're talking about after you've selected a category and you've moved over to the, I guess the form, you want to tab through the form, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because I apologize, I only got a little bit of time yesterday to try the new build. But I did go back and go through the comments, all the comments in the GitHub ticket, and with respect to what we were talking about last time of using more of an explorer type experience with a tree view on the left and then arrowing up and down and expanding and collapsing and then hitting enter and then tab to go over to the settings for that property, and then edit the property, and then shift tab to go back to the tree view. Sounded like that was already tried in May, although I was having a little trouble understanding. Well, it wasn't clear to me that everybody was talking about the same things, of where people were using arrows or tabs. I think Rob had a lot of comments in there about looked at other or had a previous implementation where it sounded like it was similar to that, more like an Explorer experience, and people didn't like it,
The
which I
issue
thought
with
was
the
interesting.
Explorer experience is that I would tab from the common settings, and it would then go over to the desktop. It would then go over to the text editor settings without notifying you. That's how it works in the GA version. Versus the build I was playing with, which, like I said, had a build date from July 15th, and I can get the exact commit offline if you want. That doesn't kick you into a different set of settings once you tab past it. It dumps you into the general VS Code window, which, like I said, isn't ideal. But then I just tab, and then I'm back to the contents, and I hit down arrow, and I can select a different category and start tabbing again.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
so that's what. Oh,
sorry
sorry.
for interruption,
Go ahead.
but you're talking about focus trapping, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
you want to tab to settings, and when settings ends, tab would be focus would be on a category of settings. Yes, you
That's
talked
exactly
about
what
it.
I want.
I think that VS Code UI in generally don't like focus trapping because we have a okay. As I understood, settings is some kind of editor. For example, in VS Code we have not only text editors but maybe Jupyter notebook editors or some sort of that. And if we do focus trapping when settings editor is opened, um, focus would stay in just in settings editor. It would be intuitively for other users.
It depends on what you grew up with. And I'm not
Yes,
saying that I'm right, but I'm just saying based on the fact that I've been using Eclipse for 10 years and Windows
in
desktop apps
Eclipse,
for over 20 years,
in Eclipse
that's what I expect.
settings is a discrete window.
Yeah, and since VS Code a lot of times acts like a desktop app, I would expect settings to be a discrete window. Like I said, if it's not easy to do that,
I
then
think
that's
it's
not
not
a huge
easy,
deal.
but
Yeah, so going back to the tabbing, because what we're talking about last time, and sorry, I'm not trying to rehash this conversation, just trying to clarify. Was on say the left panel, the tree. You only when you hit a property and you hit enter on that, the only thing in the right panel, the only thing editable on the right panel are the values for that property. Right? When you go into the right panel, you don't tab to other properties and set those. You get that one property and you can edit that, whether it's a change a Boolean or a enum or a string or an integer value or whatever. Right? And then you shift tab
That's the
back to
existing. Are you saying
the
that's the
tree view.
existing behavior, or that's the behavior you'd like to see?
No, that's what we talked about. No, that's not existing behavior.
maybe we
That's
not talk exactly about that because no, I talked about we shouldn't go to the another category of settings just by tabbing, and when list then settings list is not virtual, we already achieved that. I think it is.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying about the but the only thing I don't like about that is I forget your name, not Alex, but the other guy who was talking. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. If I have a tree view, and let's say I expand the Git settings, well, there may be several different options. There may be several sub lists under Git for different settings. But then each of those lists may have 20 different settings that I have to arrow through. And how do I know when I'm looking at, okay, here's a sublist or here's an actual setting? That's why I prefer you can only get to a sublist and then you have to start tabbing.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is because I was thinking about it more and then realizing that when I was looking at the defaults file, it looks like there's only 2 levels, although I didn't look. I saw there was over 3,000 lines in that file, so I didn't look at nearly all the settings or even close to it. But it looked like there was like a category dot property was the general way that it was set up, as opposed to category dot subcategory dot another subcategory dot property. So then if you had something that was say a sub JSON object within a JSON object, then that would just expand as well, and you would expand that and navigate into that, just like a directory structure.
But when I looked in the UI, it sort of worked like that because I had, I don't know, let's say there was something around like 10, let's just call it 10, because that's the correct order of magnitude, top level items. Then I went to extensions, and there were 28 extensions. I remember being irritated that Java wasn't included by default, but Node was. And so then I was able to look at the individual extensions, and I was able to see that we have Go and all the Go options, and Java and all the Java options, and Node and all the Node options, and CSS and all the CSS options. So it sounds like the JSON structure does not directly correspond to what's displayed in the UI.
So you mean the current list is essentially flat, but you would expect to see some nesting.
Are you talking about the JSON?
Yeah. What you just mentioned about, about the Go options and then the Java options. So you would expect to like expand or collapse a particular like top level item and then move on to the next one?
Well, I think the two things we're talking about is when I hit the Go options.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what they all are off the top of my head, but there's something about Go coverage testing and Go custom. Let's say there's a custom build option for Go and a test coverage option for Go. Once I hit Go, I expect to access those options by tabbing.
Yep.
The other alternative would be I then have to expand the Go option and arrow up and down for each individual option under the Go settings, which to me gets confusing because you can have multiple category nesting levels, and how do you know when you're exiting a category and actually getting into an option?
But is that when you're talking about, are you talking about navigating, say, the panel on the right where the properties are? Because I was talking about on the, say, the left panel, the tree structure, you would collapse and expand. Right? So you hit something that has sub-properties, or you hit something that is a JSON object of its own and has a bunch of properties within it. It would say collapse.
Let's not talk about JSON because it doesn't matter how the settings are represented in JSON. We're only talking about the UI at this point. And
yeah.
I would expect that once I access the Go options, if I right arrow and nothing else expands, I tab and change my options. If it's possible that there could be sub options under Go, let's just say in theory they had some options for debugging and some options for code generation. Those could be two substructures, two sub items. And once I hit that, I would tab to edit each of those individual options. I don't want to expand Go, expand debugging, and then have to arrow up and down to change individual debugging options. Once I expand debugging, I can't go any further, and then I tab to edit those options. And like I said, this isn't a huge deal for me one way or the other, but this is the same behavior I see in other settings applications, where you hit the bottom level, and then you tab to edit all the settings.
Yeah, yeah, and then when you tab over, you've got a form, and it's got a whole bunch of different settings within that form. Yeah.
And that's what's in the build I was playing with, and that's what I really like. And like I said in the Gitter, I'm going to leave this build around just because it lets me explore the settings, even though I'm not using it to do actual development. And if I find something I want to change, I can just copy it to the JSON in my production build.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page about that. And then Audi, what's the change that Audi made is trying to fix the issue also that I think you mentioned, where you're tabbing through the structure of settings on the left, and then you can tab into another category or a subcategory without realizing it, right? And Audi's changed
And that's fixed.
by only rendering a single category at a time.
Yeah, and that's fixed, and I really appreciate that.
Okay, it's good to hear that's an improvement.
Okay, so Rob, the comments that you were making back in May, and what I was just talking about of having a more of an Explorer tree, collapsible, expandable tree structure, and I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Me? Rob.
Oh, that was who was talking about not liking the collapsing and expanding.
Oh, Alex.
Was this Alex?
No, this is Jared. And I like the collapsing and expanding. I just don't like collapsing down to individual setting levels. I like expanding to the category and no further.
Yeah, okay. So,
yeah,
the
comments I made about the sort of Explorer selectable row approach that we had before, where it worked more like other lists in VS Code, where you can use the arrow keys to navigate through settings as rows, right? And then once you get to a row, I think you would have to press enter or tab into it to actually get to the controls in there. And we experimented with that. People on the team didn't really like that interaction method very well, just because it felt very unfamiliar to them, like compared to other forms, just any other form on any website, you get through by tabbing. And so we felt like that would be more familiar to people.
Yeah.
Okay, it was my proposal.
So then with the settings, so if I just think of it like, if I'm navigating, say, the Wi-Fi settings, or just, whatever, the control panel in Windows, there's not a key, I don't think. There's not a key sequence. It takes you back to the categories to navigate the categories. You just have to tab. If you just keep tabbing it, eventually it takes you back to, OK, cancel, apply, tab again, then you go back to the categories. I think there's a home button or something like that. And then I can go up and down. What's that?
Yeah, but if we can't do focus traps where it'll send you right back around, then I think having a key would be good as kind of a hack workaround.
Yeah. So is that the
okay. Yeah, so the expected mode of interaction is that you'll tab through the settings list, and then you can either shift tab all the way out, or we're going to just add a key binding that will put focus back in the table of contents list on the left.
Okay, that to me seems like a reasonable That seems to me like a reasonable option, given that VS Code really doesn't like modal windows.
Yeah, and I understand your point about that, but it is just not very VS Codey to pop out a different dialogue for that. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
All right, I do want to move on to the next topic in our agenda, and I think I guess we can still continue talking on the issue, and I think we would still like you to try out the experimental build that Adi sent and give your comments in the Gitter channel. But the other topic we wanted to talk about was with Venkatesh and remote collaboration using LiveShare. So Venkatesh, do you want to take it away?
Sorry, I just have one more thing. If you have suggestions for key bindings, you can leave them in the Gitter channel. That would be great. That's it.
All right. Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And I wanted to talk about your experiences performing and participating in live code walkthroughs in a remote situation. So before I get to actual questions, I just thought I'd just describe a few terms that we might be using. So a code walkthrough, for example, is a guided exploration of source code where one person is the leader who explains the code to a follower, and the leader is, can be considered the expert of the piece of code that two people are going over. They may have written the code, or they may have been like more familiar with the code base. And a follower is a person who is trying to understand what the leader wrote, if they wrote the code, or understand what the code does if the leader is trying to teach the follower, right? And today we'll talk about using doing live code walkthroughs using Visual Studio, or using LiveShare in VS Code. And we'll talk about by accessible, and we're concerned about the experiences of software developers or people who write code who may be blind or visually impaired, right? Great. So I wanted to understand, how do you generally participate in live collaborative programming activities like code walkthroughs, especially when yeah. Uh, am I there in the call?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I can hear you. I don't
Yeah, I
think
can
people are
hear you.
aware that it's a question for everybody.
Oh yeah, sorry. The question for everybody is, how do you generally participate in live collaborative code walkthroughs?
I would follow along in my own editor with an earbud.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I should. I do it too. Uh, just for okay, other code presenters talks about code, and I just explore it with the screen reader or braille display.
And how do you
I'm
do
the
this?
same way.
Oh, go on.
I mean, I have used LiveShare before. It was a couple of years ago, and we can discuss that at some point.
Mhm.
But I don't know how senior the other developers are. I'm a senior enough developer that a lot of times they can just say, here's the code we're working on, and I can read it and understand it because I have over 10 years of programming experience. I have no earthly idea how you start out programming large enterprise software if you're blind and a junior developer. So much of my ability is just the fact that I've been doing it for so long, and that it wasn't this complicated when I first started, that I've slowly been able to adapt.
Got it. How do you do this in a remote situation? Say if both developers, for those of you who said you just follow along, is it the same when then the other person is not sitting next to you and is doing it in a remote scenario?
Uh,
I just
we
do
just
it on a
clone
phone call.
Git repo.
And
Right.
do it on a phone call and follow along with the line number. And if I'm confused on where they are, reference the line number.
Got it. Got it. How often do you participate in like these code walkthroughs? Like roughly, like is it like very frequently, or somewhat sporadically? What do you think about that?
Not
Once a
very
year.
often.
Yeah, I
Not very
don't.
often.
I mean, a lot of times we'll do things over email and be like, this is where you need to change something.
Right. But yeah, go on.
But if you want, I can tell you, because the time I did, do you want me to tell you about the time I did use the LiveShare extension?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, like I said, I'm a Java programmer, but
Right.
at my prior job, we had a JavaScript-based testing framework that we had to write tests for. So one of the developers is really good with that, and I wrote some of the tests. So we used VS Code LiveShare, and basically what we did is they looked at my screen,
Mhm.
and then we called each other because for some reason the Teams microphone thing wasn't working.
Mhm.
But the problem was I couldn't really see what they were doing. Like it was almost like my cursor and their cursor didn't follow along. So they would edit the code, or I would edit the code, and LiveShare was useful because
Mhm.
they could see the edits I made. But what I really like is the ability to say, jump to wherever the collaborator is. So they can say, I just modified these, I just made my changes. and then I could just hit a keystroke and jump to wherever their cursor is. I don't think I would want the screen reader to read out everything as they're typing or moving, because that could get very chatty, especially if they're scrolling rather quickly in a file. So I would rather have the ability to jump to where they are at a given instant instead of follow along as they're navigating through code quickly.
Right.
Okay. As is you over? Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. I used LiveShare maybe 2 days ago with my blind friend, and okay, it was not very bad experience. Connection is connecting isn't very difficult,
Right.
but I think that focus feature in LiveShare is totally inaccessible for us, because in documentation says that only scrolling position would synchronize. Yes.
Right.
I think the good option would be to have some key binding to simply jump to collaborator cursor.
Right.
Okay, we can already see where collaborator cursor is in, I think it's called participants view.
I see.
But it would be more easy to simply pick a key and
Right.
okay, you're there.
I have a small question. So, how did you get to the participants view?
Oh, I'm just using F6 to jump to the side view picker and press LiveShare.
Okay.
Yes, I know that I can assign keybind on, or it's already assigned, but I don't look at this.
Okay.
Also, we could make focus feature accessible by synchronizing cursors. I don't know if screen readers and VDA on Windows or Orca on Linux would read cursor change if we change it programmatically, not by arrows, but by some hook and vis code. But if it is possible, I think it would be great, because then we could simply call each other if we are blind and we just know that, okay, look at this line, some comments, and then my friend would be maybe go to this different line slowly to and I will hear all the lines that he's traversing. I think it should be configurable, but I think it would be a great addition. With okay, if we following it will be that, but if we unfollow person, we just we just can we can just press a button and jump to their cursor. I think this mode of collaboration would be nice and accessible.
Got it. No, that is great. Yeah. So if I understand, what you're saying is when you're following the other person, you want to hear, like you want your cursors to synchronize and they should be configurable. And when you're not following, you just want to be able to jump to the other person's cursor.
Yes.
I see. Understood. Yeah, that is great. Uh, in general,
I
yeah,
think
go on. Yeah.
I agree, but I think that if you're prioritizing things, you prioritize the ability to jump to your collaborator's cursor first and cursor following second.
Right, right. Got it. In general, when you're working on, when you're doing a code walkthrough with another person, do you find yourself in situations where you think you are lost or you are falling behind, or even if you're leading, do you see that the other person is falling, like lost or falling behind? Do you see yourself in these kinds of situations? And yeah.
I think that could get distracting if you're the blind one and you're leading the code review and you start getting some kind of audible information that somebody's not keeping up, because they might legitimately be looking at something that you've just gone over, and maybe they're intentionally not keeping up. Just think it could get distracting if you're trying to move forward. Maybe there's 3, 4, 5 people in the review. You don't want to get. I don't think you'd want to get. And I've never used this feature, so apologies if what I'm saying doesn't make any sense with respect to the feature.
It's definitely important. Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to quickly give an example of in NVDA. There's a system navigation and object navigation, and there are options for having the one cursor follow the other. You can say have object navigation always follow with system navigation or not. Right? So you can navigate components of the application independently, but you can have the cursors stay with each other or not stay with each other. And then there's a keystroke that you can say move system navigation to the current object under the current item under object navigation. So I think it's similar to that. I think I think it's Mikhail, is that saying that? So I think that's an analogous example in NVDA, perhaps.
Right, yeah. You're talking about synchronizing the system cursor with the other, the system focus and the object like review cursor, right?
Yeah. So in a code review, if you want the cursors to be synchronized, you can have that option. If you don't want them to be synchronized, you can set it up that way. And then if you want to jump, your cursor to somebody else's cursor, some keystroke for that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. And on a related note, I had another question. So if you're following and the other person is going too fast, how do you indicate this to them, and how do you prefer to indicate this to them?
Is there an audio channel along with this? I mean, are you discussing?
Yeah, you can have an audio channel.
Can I just say, hey, slow down?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. It's great to know that everybody's comfortable doing that. Yeah. Right. And the opposite, right? Like if they're going too slow as well, I mean, I just assume that, yeah, what would you do in that case?
Hey,
If you're
buddy, move
following.
faster.
Yeah. Right. So in code reviews, when you generally get unlocked, if in these follow kind of a scenario, if you're following somebody, and if you feel, if you think you're lost, what have you done in the past to get like unlost, basically?
Just ask.
If it's let's just say it's a group code review with like 5, 6 people, for example.
Oh, I'm don't participate with that large code reviews.
Right.
Yeah, I'd probably just say nothing.
Right.
For better or for worse.
Right.
I'd probably just try and cut my losses and try and get my cursor up to, the current position and try and try and follow along. Or I might. I mean, depending on the crowd and depending on the complexity of the code, I might speak up and say, hey, can we step back a minute? I think you lost me. It's really dependent on the situation. If
Right.
everybody else is kind of quiet and it sort of seems like nobody's really following and this has become a kind of an exercise in futility, I might speak up. But if everybody else seems to be doing fine, then I might be quiet. But that may be more of a personality issue than anything else.
Yeah. So there probably have also been situations where you were the leader, right? And in general, how was that experience for you? With or without LiveShare in general, if you were a leader of a code walkthrough, how was that experience for you?
I generally try to do code walkthroughs at a more of a high level, not trying to go through and look at the syntax, make sure you've got defaults in all your switch statements and, stuff that a linter can do. I wouldn't want to do that in a group code review in general. If I'm leading something, it's more about looking at the organizational structure, how something is modularized, the API that's exposed from a module. Just at that level, what makes sense. I as a formerly as a manager, found that to be more relevant to a group discussion as opposed to, I don't like the name of that variable. I guess that couldn't be caught in a linter, but things like that. I would, for general code reviews, I would have, more of a one-on-one type of thing with people, have somebody else reviewing somebody's code. When you get together in a group, it would be more of a discussion of, is the general structure of this code, what do people think of the general structure of this code? What do they think of the approach of solving the problem? That I would think would be more useful in a group dynamic.
Got it. In a one-on-one dynamic, how would you, what would be different in a one-on-one dynamic?
I would have a one-on-one being more looking at the individual. I mean, looking at the. I think like you're getting at going through, say, line by line. Early in my career, I was having a code review with a senior architect, and we started at the very top, and he says, why is this file included? Why is this file included? And he was, every single line I had to justify, which was good. It really made you, be very intentional. So I would, that I think would be good for a one-on-one code review.
Right.
Going line by line. Is it? And in that case, you're looking more at, say you got a for loop. I'm reverting back to C or C++. Maybe I've got a post increment or a pre increment, and I've got my, I've got some off by one error. Right? So line by line, you can say, hey, did you mean to, pre increment or post increment this index, and now it looks like you're not going to hit the last item, or now it looks like you're going to go beyond the array bounds or something.
Got it. Right. So if you're leading a code review and if the person following you is lagging behind, how do you generally get an indication of that?
I just ask him.
Right. But
Do you understand? Or
right. Is there anything specific that prompts you to ask, or do you just periodically poll them and be like, hey, are you with me?
I think periodically would be fine.
I got it. Got it. And how have you like generally helped the other person get unlost in you know, if they were lost, like what would really help in that situation?
I think go back into some steps and try over.
Right. Got it.
But I think there's got to be, I mean, there's got to be communication. I consider, especially a one-on-one code review,
Yeah,
there
plenty
to
of
be
it.
a lot of talking. You know, so I would expect the people to be, you know, looking at the same code. If somebody's questioning, you know, what's going on in this for loop or whatever, why is there a break statement here, or why is there not a break statement here? And I would expect, you know, I wouldn't expect it to be a nonverbal interaction. I guess regardless of, I'm talking about code reviews back when I could see, right? So even regardless of, you know, vision abilities, one-on-one code reviews that I've experienced have always been very conversational.
Right. Right. And have you used any other tools that help you, you know, participate in code walkthroughs or help you conduct more effective code walkthroughs similar to like via, you know, LiveShare, maybe LiveShare in Visual Studio or anything else like that?
I always just did screen sharing.
Right. But aren't there, like, how do you deal with the accessibility when somebody like shares a screen with you?
Yeah, actually, sorry, I haven't done code reviews since I lost my site. I guess I can't really comment on that. That is a good point.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything else that everybody wanted to share about like their experience using LiveShare and their experience like collaborating on code? I'd be happy to know more about that.
Yeah, for sure. My roommate is sighted, but he was you know, using LiveShare with one of his friends. His feedback was like, oh, like my friend started to make some changes, and he's talking about those changes, but he had no idea where he's making those changes. So I haven't used LiveShare like that much. I have used it a decent amount, but maybe there's some functionality that takes you to the other person's cursor. But yeah, that was his feedback.
I see.
Yeah, there is functionality to like the way we were talking, to follow the cursor or jump the cursor, but it's not obvious, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's all that I had. Does anybody have any other questions?
Also, we should have some accessible way to indicate other participants highlight. Well, okay, when you press shift and highlight some text, I think visually it is indicated. Yes?
Yeah, I think it visually shows when somebody else selects a piece of code.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's called selection. Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
But we should have some maybe other key binding to go to other person selection, because I'm don't know how to indicate it accessibly.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, essentially when the other person selects something, their cursor might be at the same location, right? Yeah, but you would want to still know that they selected something. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, that's really helpful feedback.
So with tones, so as I mentioned, I've never used the tool, but I have used, and again, this was back when I could see, so I might be not really thinking through this very clearly. But for example, Google Docs, we used to have a team. This would be like a post-mortem in a Scrum or something. In a Google Doc, we'd have, say half a dozen developers in there editing sections, adding their comments on, what worked well, what didn't, and so forth. And it would just be nuts. It would be, people trying not to write over each other. But as I thought about that after losing my sight, I thought I couldn't possibly imagine that. How could you do that in an accessible way? If your screen reader is reading everything, it would just be nuts.
Google Docs indicate that by using a live region. When you stumble on this other cursor, it just says blah blah blah. Person is editing the same line.
Okay, so it doesn't. Because I used to as a manager, I could just watch what other people were editing and look around and read as they're editing and make comments, because we also had a hangout going, and we'd be talking about points that people were bringing up. But I have no idea how you would do something like that in an accessible way. If everything was being read to you, it would make no sense because everybody's typing at once. And I was thinking about that in terms of like extreme programming. Is that even, maybe if you're just pair programming, maybe that's not so bad because you just got one other person. But I don't know. Maybe I'm getting off topic. Sorry if I am. But this seems like a little bit of that type of thing, especially if you're doing a code review with 4, 5, 6 people, and you've got cursors all over the place, and people are looking at different things and maybe highlighting different things. Maybe somebody needs to jump in and say, hey, knock it off. Everybody needs to follow along, or we need to all get in sync. So maybe it is a different problem. But I was thinking maybe audio just beeps or tones or something. If somebody highlights something or somebody else highlights, I don't know, if everybody's cursor had a different tone. So maybe you could track.
Yeah, I wanted to say, this is Mike Barnett. I just wanted to say that, I work with Venkatesh, and that's why we're trying to simplify our scenario to be one-on-one interaction and not editing at the same time, but just explaining the code and reading it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Regarding this indication or something, I think Isidorn is working. Okay, I know that he's on vacation now, but I know that he's worked on some accessibility, editor accessibility support restructuring, and as I understood, okay, sorry, as I understood, this would allow to indicate, for example, a ruler, code ruler on VS Code to a screen reader. For now, I think that problems indicated by live region, but when this work is done, I think we could finally indicate, for example, highlighting or selection, and then we could repeat this conversation about selection and person flags. I think it's called that. What do you think about this?
So you're saying that indicate the selection of somebody who's selected using a ruler and a person flag?
For now, the ruler and the person flags isn't accessible to the screen readers because that's how VS Code code editor, I think it's called Monaco editor, accessibility is done. But then this is changes. I think we could revisit this topic.
Right. Yeah, no, that is actually great. So that is great feedback. I'm just trying to understand the scenario that you're talking about. So you're saying that indicate where the other person is using these two things, correct?
Yes. For
Ah.
example, if we go to the 13 line, screen reader would says, Eric edits this line. Or when Eric makes selection, we could go to the start of selection and screen reader says selection started.
I see.
Yeah, I think it would be nice.
Yeah, that is interesting feedback.
I do want to be respectful of time, so we're a little bit over, but I think this was a really good discussion, and I think Venkatesh, we would be open to talking more about it in the Gitter channel or having one-on-one interviews instead.
Definitely, yeah.
So thank you everyone so much for joining the call. I think we got good feedback on both remote collaboration and settings.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your perspectives.
Thanks for the
Thanks,
feedback.
everyone.
Thanks for having the call. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.